Good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's session, Ending Coal, Financing the Future, Advancing a Just Energy Transition Through Policies and Partnerships. My name is Eileen Lippert, and I'm from Solutions for Our Climate, and it's my great pleasure to be today's moderator of the session. As the world accelerates towards clean energy, coal remains one of the toughest challenges to phase out, particularly here in Asia, where it continues to underpin many power systems and economies. Today's session will look at how countries, financial institutions, and partnerships can come together to enable an early and orderly coal phase-out, and how innovative tools such as blended finance and transition credits can help to accelerate a just shift from coal to clean. I'm pleased to have with us a distinguished group of speakers and panelists who will share perspectives from governments, international organizations, and finance. And to open our session, it's my great pleasure to invite Ms. Boyoung Kang, the Director at the Ministry of Climate and Environment Economics of Korea, to deliver the welcome remarks.
Hello, good morning and welcome everyone. Thank you for coming to this important dialogue on coal phase-out. Also many thanks to the co-organizers, Solution for Our Climate and Powering Past Coal Alliance PPCA. Especially letting me speak even though I'm not related to both organizations. So to be honest, I thought of why I got invited today. Yes, I've been good friends with the founder of SFOC for about a decade now, but this is the reason why I accepted the invitation. And with PPCA, I've been in I would say, awkward relationship with PPCA since it started in 2017. PPCA sees a potential leadership from Korea for the coal phase-out in the region and kept approaching me through the years. But transforming existing energy system can't happen over the night or even months or years. I have to admit there was times that I left PPCA email unread intentionally. And after all this time and efforts from the PPCA, we are about to see significant transformation very soon. Current administration of Korea is a step away to show its fundamental commitment toward coal phase-out. And I assume Julia invited me today, so I cannot go backward anymore. And it is true, you made the smart choice. I'm not running away anymore. So coal phase-out has been discussed as a policy agenda quite a long time in the Ministry of Environment back then to address fine dust and implement its already ambitious NDCs. However, the implementation of coal power plant was under the different ministry. I may assume the participants from the governments would understand the challenges to make compromises between ministries. This is why it was not until the current government, which inaugurated last June, and two functions are merged into the Ministry of Climate, Energy, and Environment last October, that the coal phase-out became official government agenda of the Korean government. Thank you for the UK government showing a good example of Department of Energy Security and Net Zero. I hope the Korean case also can inspire many nations to follow. Without strong political will, the status quo cannot be transformed. The Korean government already announced that it will not build any new coal power plant, and now further considering to retire existing coal power plant that will reach its original 30-year of lifetime by 2040, without extending their operation as previously we did. The total of 40 power plants up to about 40 gigawatts will be decommissioned by the 2040. A specific plan for 22 power plants remaining beyond 2040 will be decided soon based on economic and environmental feasibility tests after public discussion, aligned with the principle of just transition. So please stay tuned for the next update from the Republic of Korean government. And I invite you everybody to come to PPCA event on coming Monday. My minister will deliver the further story. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Kang. Next, I will invite Sophie Westlake, the Deputy Director for International Energy Transition from the UK.
Hi. So I'm Sophie from the Department of Energy Security and Net Zero in the UK. And I'm here in our capacity as the co-chair of the Powering Past Coal Alliance. Always good opportunity to talk about coal. The UK story, you're probably bored of us telling you time and again that we were among the first countries to use coal, maybe even the first, according to my brief. But we last year phased out coal and were the first country in the G7 to do so. And we were very proud of that moment where we took that final coal plant off of the grid. And we feel very strongly that accelerating the coal transition is really one of the most important things that we can do to advance our climate objectives. So we've been leading by example. In the UK, our NDC was incredibly ambitious, with aiming for at least 81% reduction in emissions by 2035. Coal is part of that story, but there are many hard things that we're going to have to do as part of that decarbonisation plan. So the global imperative for action. We know that the coal pipeline has significantly reduced since 2015, which marks a major step forward in the transition away from coal. But we know this is an incredibly difficult conversation to be having across the world, and many countries where there are coal plants that are young. So it is hard to kind of approach that issue. But in that respect, we really welcome the recent signals and interest from the Korean government to talk about this issue. And we know that because in the Asia-Pacific region, reliance on coal power is particularly acute. And the average, as I said, many coal plants are young. The average age of a coal plant is less than 15 years old across the region, and energy demand is also growing. So we know that this is like a hard issue to deal with, but it's really heartening to see that the progress is starting to be made and decisions are being taken. So in 2020, we did notice that the governor of now I hope I don't pronounce this wrong, Gyeonggi province, championed coal phase out and the work of the PPCA, and so we were really happy to see the governor, who is now president of Korea, Lee Jae-myung, has continued his dedication to the issue of coal transition, pledging on the campaign trail to phase out coal power in Korea by 2040. So that's why I'm very happy to be here today, and really, really excited to hear the remarks of the first speaker and of what the plans will be in Korea going forward. A final word on international collaboration through the PPCA and the action plan. The transition, we know, necessitates not just collective discussion, but also collective action from governments, utilities, public and private financial stakeholders to enable the swift deployment of capital, expertise and support where it is most needed. And the PPCA has heralded the call for action from the COP30 presidency, including launching of a solutions bank to bring together best practice from across the world. And we're really happy also to support the PPCA's action plan, which we are launching today to support the swift shift from coal to clean power globally. And I'm sure that Julia is going to talk much more about that, so I will not steal too much of your thunder in that respect. So I'll leave it there, and thank you so much for having us to speak today, and I really look forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Westlake. I think that's the perfect stage for our panel. So I'm now happy to invite our panelists to the stage, and the moderator of the panel discussing how to scale Asia's energy transition through financial levers and policy will be Joo-jin Kim, the Chief Executive Officer of Solutions for Our Climate. And we will then have Orke Dorsey, the primary advisor to the Minister of the Environment and Climate Change Mongolia. I'm also happy to invite Marcelo Sino Cruz, the Director of the Energy Policy and Planning Bureau of the Philippines, Ms. Julia Skorupska, the Head of Secretariat of the Powering Past Coal Alliance, and Xing Chang, the Senior Specialist of the Asia Infrastructure and Investment Bank Sectors, Themes and Finance Solutions Department. Later on, we will also have Ned Cohane joining us, the President of the Center for Climate and Energy Solutions, but he will join a bit later.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for your time. It's busy, and this morning there was some difficulties in security. Yeah, I think all the good words are spoken by Director Kong and Deputy Director Westlake. I won't go long. I mean, we have representatives from an MBB, the Powering Past Coal Alliance, which is sort of a UK and Canadian government together, Philippines, and Mongolia. I think the stories and perspectives in Singapore will be very, very different and diverse. And I think it might be a good chance to share that, have a short time to share those perspectives. Special Advisor Durzi from Mongolia will have to leave at 11:20, so I'll probably do his questions first. Mongolia relies heavily on coal for energy security. Half of Mongolia's emissions is coal, and half is food and agriculture emissions. A lot of livestock in Mongolia, but also Mongolia has a lot of land, a lot of wind potential, and solar potential. My question to Special Advisor is, how does the government of Mongolia balance the need for reliability with phase-out goals? And what support, technical, financial, or institutional, would most accelerate coal retirement opportunities?
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm happy to participating in this panel meetings. So it's the too noisy. As you know, Mongolia is one of the coldest country in the world, the high mountain plateau, where is the windy, and the winter time is that very cold. So all 90% of Mongolian energy and then heating comes from coal-burning power plants. So Mongolian transition to living of the coal depends on how we will be dealing with this energy dependence from the coal. Coal is in Mongolia affordable and then locally available. So, and then many economic sectors depends on the coal industry. So we planning to establish legal framework and the framework for not dependent on the coal for all these sectors, and then local communities, women's, youths, and the other things. We have to establish this system to move forward to not to using of the too much coals. This is the major problem for Mongolia. Also, Mongolia is that Mongolia is a country now doing several things like parallel investment to upscale renewable energy, like hydropower plants, wind power plants, and then solar power plants. We trying to efficiency and emission upgrade exceed the heat from the power plants. We trying to strengthen grid stability because this is the winter time, especially grid stability is very unstable, and then we also very dependent from import of electricity from Russia and China. So, and piloting of introducing of the energy storage technology and then energy efficiency technology. That's the major actions Mongolian government and the Mongolian power sector implementing to live to not too heavily rely on the coal sections. So what kind of question is what kind of support we need to get it? Actually there is the three type of the support. As you say that what kind of technical, financial, and then institutional, all three support, we need to get it because technical support gives us systemic planning, grid upgrades, storage technologies, and new regulatory models. Financial support gives us long-term, concessional, and liable, affordable, liable financing, and then transition financing instruments for us. And then institutional support is we strengthening of policy. We plan to adopt the climate change law. Climate change, not only this resilience, climate change resilience law, which will be given us to making a long term and then middle term of the development process of energy section, and then to not too much depend on energy section. But reality is that Mongolia is still having very big dependence from coal. So this is our nearest goal, and that this urgently we need to transition from coal to other energy generations, which gives us for Mongolians not only climate change issues, also big issues of the air pollution issues will be settled down.
Thank you. Thank you very much. In the meantime, Nat has come. My next question I would like to direct to Julie, and I have one more question. Can you?
There is a very, very difficult question.
Yes. Five. Julia, from the PPCA experience, what policy reforms have been most effective in moving from coal phase-out ambition to implementation?
Thanks so much. Is my microphone working?
Yeah, it's working.
Yeah. So maybe first to say a couple of words about what the PPCA is. So the idea of the Powering Past Coal Alliance is that we bring together people who are really working on the transition. So governments, finance, utilities, and business to think about practical solutions to some of the challenges of the transition. I mean, as we just heard, people know that ultimately transition from coal to cleaner energy sources will be beneficial, but there are real challenges on the way. Large communities dependent on coal, high dependence on coal, young power plants, and also the need to kind of repurpose your grid for different energy sources. So the question is, what are the policy solutions that we have seen which make the biggest difference? I mean, across our membership, there's perhaps 3 things that we can say that we see time and time again are really helping countries to deliver a successful transition. And obviously, in every context, you have to do things slightly differently. But these 3 principles, I think, we kind of see time and again really help. And the first of those is having a long-term energy plan. So having a clear plan for how you want the transition to proceed, potentially a phase-out date for coal, and a commitment to no new coal. So I think that having this kind of long-term plan is something which really helps both investment to mobilize around the transition. They understand the direction of travel, what's going to be needed, where the demand is going to be. It also really helps communities to mobilize around the transition. So many of these communities know that coal is something which is going to phase out, but over time it's a declining industry. And having the certainty of it's going to be over the next 15 years, but we're going to do this, allows people to start to plan, to bring in investment to support the communities as the transition takes place. So that's the first thing that we would say is really important for planning a transition. The second thing is to have an inclusive process around the transition. So again, we see time and time again places where the transition is being delivered really effectively. There has been a process of national dialogue, of bringing together the right stakeholders to plan for transition. So Chile, I think, is a really good example here of having set their net zero target. They brought in all of the key stakeholders, the utilities, the communities, the unions, to think about planning for the transition and form voluntary agreements with each of the coal power plants about when they would retire, and provided time for people to plan for the transition. So I think that's the second thing, having an inclusive process to plan for the transition. And then I would say, like, the third lesson that comes up time and time again from our membership is creating a fair kind of platform for alternative energy sources to compete. So we all know that almost everywhere in the world now renewables are cheaper than coal, and that in the long term it's going to lead to more affordable energy. But we've built systems which are designed to provide stable energy from fossil fuels, and so often there is a system that favours fossil fuels. There might be subsidies, the way in which we contract might favour fossil fuels, and I think looking at that is something which has really helped countries to advance their transition. And depending on the context, there are many with different ways of doing that. So it could be things like carbon pricing, it could be things like air pollution regulation, or it could be looking at how you're prioritizing dispatch, so making sure that you're giving a fair way for renewables to compete through the dispatch order, or also looking at how you're kind of contracting as well. So in the UK, there's a lot of use of contracts for difference as a way to bring renewables into the market. So 3 things: having a plan, involving communities, having an inclusive process, and also making sure that you have a level playing field for alternatives to compete.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for explaining your experience engaging many governments, subnationals, going through a coal phase-out process. My next question goes to Director Sina Cruz. The Philippines has ambitious renewable energy targets and ongoing discussions on early coal retirement. What factors does the government consider when evaluating early retirement pathways?
Okay, thank you for that question. So the first concern that we need to address is on energy security. So we need to look at what would be the impact of coal retirement in terms of the ensuring that we do have enough supply of energy. The other one is on affordability. And the last one is on reliability. Because we are a developing country, so we need more affordable and reliable source of energy. Although in our Philippine Energy Plan, we indicated there that on the coal transition, meaning as high as 60% right now, we are heavily dependent on coal, and it will go down to as much as around 10% by 2050. Although right now, we don't have any commitment yet on net zero because it is easy to commit something, no? But on how to achieve it is another issue. So what we are trying to do right now is to overachieve our targets, no? Increasing the RE share. The other thing is that it was already mentioned that it's very difficult for the countries, no, with relatively young coal power plants because it means that there will be lost revenue for the proponents, and what would make them or encourage them to shift to transition from coal to clean. And there must be a clear mechanism to that. Now, one of which is already mentioned on the transition credits. Like for instance, the Philippines is now entering into agreement with Singapore for the transition credit, specifically for the retirement of one coal power plant. But we're talking here of several coal power plants in the Philippines. And what we need right now is access to low-cost financing, even grants, for us to encourage them to transition from coal to clean fuel. Although currently we do have coal moratorium, so there will be no more additional coal except for own use. And if we're going to proceed with such direction on the transition from coal, we have already identified criteria for that. And although we don't have yet the policy, but we are discussing the criteria, one of which is if the plant is somehow inefficient, the plant is somehow incurred several outages, the plant is somehow is not cost effective anymore. These are some of the criteria that we are looking at if we're going to proceed with such policy on transition on coal.
Thank you. I will revisit the financing discussion later. My next question, I think, will be to Director General Chia. Singapore has been doing a lot on financing the phase out of coal. Can you introduce a little bit what Singaporean government does in the region on this and what you see the future of that is?
Yeah, thanks so much for the question. Yeah, we have been looking at early phase out of coal. In fact, just a couple of days back, we launched the Traction Report. It's really a coalition that our monetary authority brought together to help drive and to support coal transition itself. It's a key milestone because a lot of the work that Traction has done is really to finalize the framework that is needed to generate credits from early coal retirement projects. And that work actually took a couple of years. We worked very closely with Nate, as well as South Pole, Vera, and various financiers to ensure that the eventual methodology, which is now finalized, actually provides assurance of environmental integrity. So that's one piece of work that we have. I mean, we have closed a chapter on, and right now our focus is how do we take this forward? And to take this forward, I'd say there are two key things that we need to do. It's really implementation. So implementation in two forms. One, ensuring that there's a pipeline of projects. I mean, when the report was done, it identified that potentially 1/3 of coal plants in Asia are suitable for generation of transition credits. But the reality is that we only have the SLTech plant right now as a serious pilot that's being looked at. The pipeline still needs to be developed, and I think we are working with different countries, different project developers to generate that pipeline itself. But that's really only a project level approach towards generating carbon credits. The other approach is, I think, which Nate will probably talk a little bit more about, is the jurisdictional or sectorial approach to generating credits. And there is, on that, we have got Chile, we have got the Dominican Republic that is keen to move on that front. It's a different approach. We think both are complementary because there are pros and cons of implementing a sectorial approach versus implementing a project-based approach. But overall, we need a pipeline, and I think that's one key piece of work that needs to be done. The other piece that I think it's important is lining up the buyers. And I think if you look, at least over the last 1 year plus, there have been more corporate buyers coming onto the scene itself that have expressed an interest in willing to offtake transition credits. The other space that we need to work more on is on the sovereign buyers. We need to get more sovereign buyers on board. So you have got a broader mix of buyers itself. And on the sovereign buyers, I maybe just end with one last point, which was mentioned by my colleague from the Philippines, the importance of having these credits generated eligible for compliance use under Article 6 itself. And the reason is that generating high quality credits from transition projects is not going to come at a low cost. It's going to come at a cost premium itself. And in order to be able to support the demand for these credits, I think Article 6 compliance, the endorsement and the authorization is important. So on that front, we are in very close discussions with the Philippines. Hopefully we can move forward. We already signed an MOU to conclude on Article 6, but we are putting in place an implementation framework And hopefully the project that we have always been talking about, SFOC, will be one of the first few projects that will be authorized under this framework itself. Thanks.
Thank you. So a little bit of financing, more talk about financing. Maybe I go to Special Advisor Zhang. Since you're at one of the largest MDBs in the world, MDBs are under pressure to unlock more transition finance. What financing structures, such as blended finance or guarantees, are most effective in making early retirement investable?
Okay, thank you. And then first, thanks for the invite. And then I'm from AIIB, as introduced. So for the MDB and for us, so we committed not to finance coal, so this is clear. And then, of course, this early coal retirement is important, but at the same time, we also acknowledge actually it is quite complex. So the colleagues already mentioned. So when it comes to the financial instrument, I think by now people perhaps would agree that there is not really kind of a single bullet point, the single silver bullet, right, to solve this issue. So basically, it requires like tailored and also perhaps multi-layered design of the financial structure to make it happen. My point, let me explain. So one is, if we look at the complexity of this issue, so this early coal retirement is considered as very high risk. I mean, in terms of the risk and return, mismatch, right? And also, I think people are also very clear. The public sector is already takes the lead to signal this issue. Let's say to lead the discussion. But in order to implement that, we really need the private sector. And then when we mobilize the private sector, and then we have to make it as financially and economically viable. So with this said, I think for this type of the project, it is already considered as a very high risk in terms of the uncertainty of revenue. Like, for example, we are talking about early retirement, right? Which means the original financial model is no longer be valid. And then we are altering that. So that created issues to the original investors and then the utilities. And second, some of the expected electricity would no longer be provided by this project. Then what would be the replacement? Like, what would make up this gap? So that's also that goes to, for example, the renewable energies or new technologies to make this up, right? Then how to financially support this, that also, becomes a question. And then colleagues already talked about the just transition and social issues. So I think all these just amplify the risk perceived by the private sector. So for this part, the blended finance and the concessional fundings from the donors and then maybe philanthropists would be very helpful. In either through equity or subordinated debt. So that could, let's say they mitigate or optimize the risk profile of this project, therefore crowd in the private sector, which would otherwise be in the sideline of this discussion. And the second point is to say, this type of the project also has quite, this counterparty or policy-related risk. Like, for example, the utilities may fail to pay the capacity payment, or the government or the regulation changed, which actually changed this prospect of this project completely. So in this type of the risk, I think the MDB and also some other peers could provide guarantees. The guarantee is also very powerful, let's say, instrument that not only to, let's say, to increase the predictability of the project, but also overall to lower the cost of the project. So, lastly, I think just want to say that the capital flow only to the places or the areas where it sees the clarity. So basically, I'm coming to the transparency and clarity, right? So in this context, I think this a KPI-based structure or sustainability-linked structure would actually be helpful. So in that sense, we have very clear kind of specified the milestones and then when the project get to the milestones, and then the payment would be made. I think that is very key point to make sure that we are not only we are actually financing the real transition instead of financing just a good intent. Right? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. So guarantees, making it financially viable for the private sector, all mentioned by Dr. Zhang. Nat, thank you. Thank you for joining. I understand that seat you can't hear very well. Transitions credit have been proposed as an innovative mechanism to finance early coal retirements while ensuring fairness and integrity. From your perspective, how can these credits realistically help countries like the Philippines or other in Asia, Korea as well, move faster on coal phase out?
Well, thanks so much. And first of all, thanks, Jujin, and to SFOC in Korea. And apologies for being late. I've been to this is my 12th COP, but I committed the rookie mistake of going to the wrong pavilion. So I apologize. It's a terrific panel, and I apologize for being late. I want to pick up on a couple of themes. Let me just introduce myself and why I'm here. I'm Nat Cohan. I'm the president of the Center for Climate and Energy Solutions, and we run something called the Kinetic Coalition, which is looking to build support for and buyers for and catalyze a market in high integrity energy transition credits to accelerate this transition from coal to clean. And let me pick up on a couple of the themes from other panelists just to sort of ground it. First, I want to pick up on what Julia said. There are lots of levers we need. We need to be thinking holistically about the transition from coal to clean. I think transition credits can be an important source of that, but there's so much else we need to do. So I want to make sure it doesn't come across, I'm just going to talk about that, but it's not a silver bullet. There's so much that needs to be done, and I think PPCA is really leading the way on that. I also want to touch on what Director Senecruz said. When we're thinking about how to accelerate that transition, we have to make sure we're meeting the needs of the countries that it's happening in. And that means, as the director said, security, energy security, affordability, reliability. And I'll come back to how we think about that in the context of the coal credits. And then we have to think about integrity. That's the other kind of foundational piece, environmental integrity, and Ben mentioned that on the Singapore side. So what are we doing to try to address those? We're looking to catalyze actual transactions. We are piloting transactions of high integrity carbon credits that represent the emissions reductions associated with clean energy systems, with retiring coal early and moving to clean. We're thinking about this in two ways. We have two different methodologies. We're piloting both of them because we think some of them work well in one place or another. I think that was somewhere else. One of them is a project level methodology. We're working in the Philippines to close the coal plant. Director mentioned, Ben mentioned, it's a single coal plant. It has 10 years to go after 2030. It has a power purchase agreement out to 2040. If we close it 10 years early, we avoid 10 years, that's almost 20 million tons of emissions just from that plant. But to make sure we're meeting those needs of security, affordability, reliability, we're replacing that, or the developers are replacing that, not only with solar power, but also with battery storage. For any grid wonks out there, that means it's going to be mid-merit power that goes from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m., and it really meets the needs of the grid in that part of the Philippines. So you're meeting that need of affordability, reliability, security, you're getting those emissions reductions, and then we have a methodology that's been done by Vera, and it's being assessed by the Integrity Council for the Voluntary Carbon Markets. That's our gold standard for integrity, and once that's through, that methodology will give us assurance that we're measuring those tons the right way. We see that transaction as a really interesting one because one of the things Kinetic does is we bring private sector buyers, voluntary buyers, multinational companies in our coalition who want to have they want to invest in clean energy systems in their supply chains. They want to advance that coal to clean transition. And so they're willing to buy these credits as part of their climate commitments. I should say the just transition is part of this methodology. So part of the methodology is making sure that we're also attending to the workers and the communities. And by getting buyers for those credits, and we're also working with Singapore and other countries to explore, maybe we can have sovereign buyers as well, maybe we can have compliance buyers. So sovereigns, compliance companies that need to have, that face compliance obligations, and companies doing this in the voluntary market. What that does is it fills the financing gap that that especially Zhang was talking about. So it fills that financing gap to make sure that there's an additional source of finance to help fill the to help make up that difference between the cost of the coal plant and the cost of solar. So that's what we're doing in the Philippines. Very briefly, we see other applications beyond the Philippines for coal plants, and we see ways potentially in places, as Ben mentioned, like the Dominican Republic and Chile and elsewhere, to do this at an energy system-wide level that could provide financing and incentives to reduce emissions across the entire grid. Very early stages, but we're really excited. And to come back to where I started, our companies, the companies we're working with and the countries we're working with, I think see this as a chance to catalyze a market. It doesn't solve everything. As Ben said, it's probably only a third of the coal plants are suitable for this. There are so many other layers that we need, but it could be one tool in the toolbox, and we think it's an exciting one.
Thank you. Yeah, we've had many of these discussions. Special Advisor Durzi will have to leave in a couple of minutes, but before you leave, from your perspective, you heard about the Singapore, Philippines, international kind of collaboration going on here to phase out coal. Although not all the coal power plants in the Philippines right now. From your perspective, what role can regional partnerships or cross-border initiatives play in helping Mongolia diversify its energy mix and accelerate a just transition?
Thank you. Good question. Regional cooperation very important for Mongolia on several issues. One is that it gives Mongolian grid to connect to neighboring our country. As you know, that we do have two big neighbors, Russia and China, only two neighbors. So it gives us to connect to the Mongolian grid, connect to the through the Chinese grid to regional grid. So it gives us to sell electricity, export electricity through the China to regional. This is the first one. Second is, as I said, that Mongolia has very cold winter, which means that seasonal variety of Mongolian usage of energy system gives very bad things for us, because in wintertime we becoming dependent from Russian import of electricity, because variety is very high on Mongolian energy generation systems cannot handle this difference between the winter time seasonal and then summer times. So it gives us not dependency from our northern neighbors. We can, through the other grid, we can get and then be not dependent on one country or something. This is the second possibility on the regional cooperation. Third is that it makes Mongolia possible to funding and then implement the large scale of the renewable energy generations, which gives us to expert variable of our grid. It means that gives Mongolia more economic benefits to invest the energy systems, not depending on the coal. And then of course fourth one is that gives us way to connect to the regional financing, regional technology, and then of course regional best practices to use for Mongolia to not dependent on the coal. So all this together gives us for Mongolia diversification of the Mongolian energy system, and not to be too much dependent on coal generations, coal-burned energy generations.
Thank you, Special Advisor Durzi. I met Advisor Durzi a month ago in Seoul. He's actually a two-time MP of Mongolia. And Mongolia plays a very important role, especially in the forestry world, because Mongolia will be hosting the CCD, the Desertification COP next year. Very important thing. I hope this meeting leads to more collaborations with other counterparts. Yes. Thank you. Kind of lost. Yes. I would like to go to Director Sinocruz. I mean, no. Julia, actually. Julia. Easy question for you. Can you highlight, I think you already answered some of this, can you highlight best practices in phasing out coal at a national and subnational level? What are the learnings?
Yeah, so we've already talked a little bit about some of the examples of best practices of phasing out coal and also some of the kind of specific challenges which are faced in emerging economies for phasing out coal. So young coal power plants, communities that are very dependent on coal, a rising demand for electricity. And across our membership, there are examples of people who are grappling with some of these challenges. So I spoke a little bit already about Chile, where they face some of these challenges. Morocco as well is a place where some of these challenges are being grappled with. They're coming up with some really interesting policies to incentivize the build out of renewables. And we've heard some great examples already from the Philippines as well. So in September, we put together a solution bank. So we brought together 17 case studies of ways in which people are dealing with some of these challenges. So energy security, retiring young coal power plants, and also delivering a just transition. So I would encourage people to look at that solution bank, and you can read about Cheongnam as well in Korea, which is a great subnational example. But obviously there isn't, the solution that works somewhere else isn't necessarily going to work for you. And that's the task that we have now. And we've been working over the last 2 years to be thinking about what are the gaps, where are the places where solutions don't yet quite exist, and what's the work which needs to be done. And as Sophie already mentioned, we're releasing an action plan today of what we see some of the key next steps as being in this area. And there are kind of 3 primary things that we're suggesting through this action plan, but we need to be focusing on over the next few years. So the first is this task of how do you help governments to build a plan that will work for their context. So we heard about some of the challenges in Mongolia around very cold winters. Elsewhere, there are different challenges that people have which are not yet solved. So how do we work with countries to support them to develop solutions to these challenges? And one of the things we're asking today is for countries who are interested in doing that with us, or for utilities who are interested in doing that with us, to get in touch. But over the next 2 years, we'll be looking to build partnerships with countries and with utilities to support them on that planning process. So what is the solution that will work in your context? The second lever we've also touched on, which is scaling finance for the transition. And there, I think there's a number of things that we could be looking at, particularly picking up some of Nat's points about how do you crowd the private sector in here. What is it that governments can be doing to create the certainty for people to invest in these transitions, as well as how do MDBs de-risk? And then the last lever is around building a project pipeline. And there again, I think it's about how do we both let people know that these solutions exist. So Ben already mentioned that they've assessed that for a third of coal power plants in Asia, there could be a solution through transition credits. There are other solutions as well. So how do we let people know about those? But also, how do we work together to build the solutions for more complicated cases? For example, vertically integrated utilities, where it can be quite complicated to think about how to transition, or older coal power plants. So again, we're asking people today, especially MDBs, people delivering these solutions, to come together and spend the next year thinking about how can we really target building that project pipeline? How do we get people to come forward to think about, could this work for them, and how do we build the solutions that we need?
Thank you. Thank you very much. My next question would go to Director Sinocruz. I think, ensuring a just transition means supporting workers, utilities, and local communities. How is the government thinking about social protection and job creation as coal assets are phased down?
Okay, right now we do have a roadmap on energy, on just transition. And we partner with UNOPS because I asked UNOPS to do a study.
UNOPS, right?
Yeah, UNOPS, yeah. UN Office for project services, right? Okay. I asked them to conduct a study for the Philippines to look at what would be the impact if we're going to close coal plants, if we're going to close coal mines. No? What would be the impact? How many workers will be displaced? How many livelihoods will be affected? And what would be the alternatives for them? So we were informed that they already bid out this project, and hopefully this project will proceed next year. But basically right now, what we want to do is to conduct a social dialogue, because we were informed because there was a candidate coal power plant for early retirement, but the workers there they already know that this plant will be retired soon, but they don't have, or the management has no plan for them. What will happen to them? Would they be rehired, or there will be the management will provide them with the necessary upskilling for them to operate this clean energy facility, among others. So we are started doing the social dialogue with the Federation of Workers, with the employers association, and we are also looking at the skills gap. Because looking at the skills gap, we would know what would be the trainings that they need for them to be employed once we do this transition. So this transition would be a long process, and I believe that looking at because the challenge here is what would be the alternatives for those that will be affected, and if the government cannot provide such alternatives for them, we do have another problem. Because in the Philippines, we do have a high case or rate of unemployment. If you cannot provide alternatives for them, this will add up to the unemployment rate. So we need to be careful about this. We need to do social dialogues. We need to discuss this with the project proponents, the power plant management, for them to do the upskilling of their workers once they're going to proceed with the retirement, so that the workers will not be left behind. So they will these workers will be included in the transition. So that's the thing that we need to look at here.
Thank you. Specialist Zhang, the next question I would like to ask you, it's sort of related to what Director Sino Cruz mentioned about the transition challenges. What criteria does AIIB use to evaluate whether coal phase out or transition finance proposals are credible or have enough integrity? Yeah.
Right. Okay. First I have to clarify that. So AIIB, we want to support definitely this important project. But as I said, we really struggled with the pipeline. So we heard the panelists, right? I think this bankability gap between this political ambition and the actual project on the ground, we have to find a smarter way to move it forward. So with this said, we have several ideas and discussions, but we don't really have an active project at the moment. But I can share, for this type of the project, still, we will check at least 2-3 different aspects. So one is, of course, to make sure the project itself is aligned with the country's priority. So, and to make sure that it is actually what the country wants, because for us, we want to see that commitment and, clearly, reflected in the country's policy. That is very important. And second, and colleagues also mentioned this transition plan. right? I mean, to us, it is not only the transmission plan of the sector, I mean, as a kind of a topic, but it must be project by project and project specific. And then transition plan itself shouldn't just about, let's say, a timeline of early retirement. It goes much beyond that. Like, for example, we want to see, countries' policy and the sector policy, and then we want to see the key legal implications because of the utilities and early investors and so on and so forth. All these things need to be clearly spelled out. And we also want to see if the renewable energy would be built to fill the gap, right? And then how this renewable energy design and then the off-taking contract and agreement is integrated into this overall structure. And then, of course, just transition, colleagues also mentioned. So for us, so that is, I always say that it is a huge project, not just the financial or engineering side, but also all the different environment and the social side. And then I mentioned environment social because for all the MDBs, basically the environmental social safeguard is also the starting point. For this type of project, we know that after the decommissioning of the coal, we need to invest a lot of effort in the site remediation on the pollutions and the post-closures and the pollutants and so on and so forth. That is also a huge project. So basically, we could just ramp up to say that this is a really kind of a complex project, but we definitely want to support that given the importance in this overall decarbonization and climate agenda. So just, very happy to see, different project cases, and then I hope we could somehow, demonstrate some cases, just basically, if possible, to create some template, because this replicability eventually is the key for going for scale, right? So that is something that, I really want to say.
Yeah, and I have a question to you.
If I can, let me come in really quick on the just transition piece, and then because I think this point is so important, and I think Director Sinacruz, especially what you said, is so important. And just to give an example, which of course you're familiar with, but for others, I visited the South Luzon plant in August in the Philippines, the one I was talking about earlier, and the plant operator put up a list of all 192 people who work in the plant. And they have a plan for every person on that list for how to make sure that that person has a job going forward after the plant closure. Once you look at that list, you realize some of those people are working in finance or accounting or management, or they're operating the plant, and they can go there and the plant operator will able to find them a similar job. It doesn't have to be a coal plant, but they can get a similar good job elsewhere in the community nearby. And then the coal plant engineers are very highly skilled. They'll be able to locate them as well. So I think your point, Director, about needing that kind of person-by-person plan, I think that when you think, what does the just transition plan mean for the workforce? It means making sure you can see your way to getting jobs for every one of the people. And I think that takes attention and it takes time, but it's something that can be done. And in the methodologies we're using, it's a core part of what we're looking for.
Thank you. Your question reminded me some other discussions we had. I won't ask the question probably that was given to you. Which was about integrity and additionality, but I think you've answered that question many times.
Maybe I'll say something really quick on that, because we hear, Specialist Zhang mentioned some of this as well, and I think that's where, and Ben said it too, and I think this is where we look to the kind of the infrastructure that's been built up in the carbon credit space. There may be folks who have been following this. I think in the last few years, the integrity in the carbon credit market has really risen significantly, because people did recognize that 5-10 years ago there were concerns around integrity. So there's been a whole set of initiatives. I mentioned this Integrity Council for the Voluntary Carbon Market, an independent body with its own experts that looks at all the methodologies and assesses them for integrity with climate, but also environment and social. And so when we say we're looking for high integrity credits, first of all, we're doing that because we believe it's the right thing, but also because our buyers, whether it's sovereign buyers or companies, are only interested if it's high integrity. And the benchmark for high integrity we look to is that independent assessment by the Integrity Council, on top of all the great work that Vera as an organization does to even issue the standard. So we feel there's several layers there that gives us confidence that if something gets approved by Vera and gets approved by ICVCM, it represents high integrity.
Okay. Another tricky question, and we had a discussion about this. I've talked with a couple of corporates about transition credits and retiring big scale assets. It's not just coal power plants; it's also steel mills and all kinds of other big stuff. Do you think the private sector will be willing to pay?
You mean on the buy side?
Yeah.
I
mean, is there money out there? These are a lot of emissions.
It's a great question. When we talk to the companies in our
by the way,
coalition-
I would like to ask the same question to
Yeah.
Director General Cha.
I'll be quick. Okay? But when we talk to the companies in our coalition, essentially they say a version of the following. Look, if you're asking us to pay for, tens of gigatons of emissions reductions from all the coal plants, and that's not in the cards. They can't put billions and billions of dollars on the table. But they are willing to make an early stage commitment now that will run into the millions or the tens of millions of dollars that shows this is possible, that shows how to make a transaction work. I think we have a pipeline. We have companies that are interested in doing the first 5 or 10 of these transactions, showing they work in the Philippines and the Dominican Republic, elsewhere. And then I think they say, well, look, they want to scale. They want to see this market scale. I think we could see other companies coming in. I think we could see sovereigns coming in. But it's the first step that's always the hardest. And where our companies are really excited is the prospect of being catalytic and showing how this can work. And so I think that's the critical step. And then if we can show it works with integrity, show that it meets the needs of the countries for security, reliability, affordability, then I think we'll see the market grow.
Director General Cha?
To the question on whether there is indeed demand, given the potential price points and the quality, I'd say yes, if you can provide assurance on high levels of environmental integrity. And we talked about getting the ICVCM CCP label. I think that's important. But my sense is that the CCP labels operate at a methodology level. And below the methodology level are projects. And there are methodologies that have been shown that actually there can be a wide variance in terms of quality. So my own initial view is that I think getting assurance at the project level through the use of credible rating agencies, I think will provide an additional layer of assurance on quality itself. So that's one piece. The other piece which I think is important, and this is more for not for the voluntary use, but for the compliance use of credits, is whether there's the ability to secure longer term corresponding adjustments and authorizations. Right now, if you look at the compliance market, all the corresponding adjustment given only goes up to 2030. SLTech plant that we're talking about, actually I think the first credit will only be generated in 2029 or 2030 itself. With the long tail thereafter post 2030. So the question is the government of Philippines prepared to give corresponding adjustment post 2030? I know this can be a bit challenging because not all countries right now have their post 2030 emissions target. So if you don't have a post 2030 emissions target, is there the confidence to make a commitment on corresponding adjustments without knowing where you need to land in 2035, for example, and the pathway thereafter towards net zero, because it's not only 2025, it's 2040. So I think those are the two sets of conditions which I think if we can check as many of these boxes as possible, I think there'll be assurance, and I think that the financing is absolutely critical. And I want to end by making one point. The financing of this project is key because there's a gap between when you get the revenue from the credits and when you need to make the investment. How carbon markets work is that credits can only be generated ex post after the abatement has been realized. But the challenge is that all these projects, the investments need to be incurred ex ante. And the gap between when the investments occur and when the credits are generated, depending on project type, can be quite long. It's optimistically 3 years, if not 5 years. I've heard cases of even 10 years itself. So I think it's that bridge that is important. So which is why quality assurance, price assurance, I think will help address this bridging need itself. Thanks.
Thank you. I just wanted to mention that your ex-post-tech question right now, actually a big Korean conglomerate is very interested in this concept, and their think tanks are talking about how to bridge that gap and using their own kind of credit mechanism to procure financing to do the same thing. We've been having a lot of discussion tonight. It would be great if your government also engages with them as well. I think we've covered everything that in the provided question list. Any last comments before we open to the floor? No. Any last comments? Nobody? Sorry.
Can I say one?
Yeah.
Just very quickly. You asked earlier in the original question about countries like Korea, what would be in it for them, and so I just wanted to address that briefly. And Ben, not to put Singapore on the spot, but I think Singapore has thought as much about this as, without committing anything, has thought as much about this, so would have a better country view. But I guess when I think about what would be in this for a potentially sovereign country buying these credits, or having their private companies that are subject to a regulatory obligation use the credits towards that obligation, I think first the bedrock has to be integrity, and we've talked a lot about that. And I think this is a way for countries that are able to take on more ambition on the part of the world, frankly, and take on ambition and be able to drive emissions reductions first in their home country, but also use that to drive emissions reductions maybe in their neighboring region, in neighbors that, through things like the coal to clean transition and energy transition that are accelerating the transition to clean, that are reducing emissions, that are meeting all the needs we've talked about at security, reliability, affordability. I think that's a potentially important opportunity for countries to help essentially accelerate the rate, accelerate that transition through the ambition that they take on, but do it in a way that is high integrity and meets their own needs from a climate point of view.
Thank you. Before you came, the director of the Korean Ministry of Climate and Energy also was talking about the government's plans to phase out coal. I think more announcements will come out about that. But our coal plants are quite new, and the ambition and that scale of money is going to be big. It's not just coal; it's also steel mills as well. That we've got to think about this question. Any questions from the floor? Any comments or questions from the floor? If not, I think we could. There was a fireside chat portion, but I think. Oh yeah.
Hi. I have a questions for you. May I have a questions for you? You just mentioned about high integrity carbon credit, and it should have the label. Beside abiding with the standards, Vera and Gold standard, which is popular and already have a good reputations. For example, it should have the ICVCM labels as well. But in the case that if it is national approved, for example, with Vietnamese credit, with Vietnam, for example, we are developing our own national standard, and we also considering some credits from voluntary carbon market, but because it's still under consideration. But I was just wondering that if it's under the national approval, do you think that it's also another way to enhance the integrity of the credits? Thank you.
Thank you. So I think the question was whether a national approval by a national regulator, a national agency, is also a sign of quality. I certainly think so, and I know in our conversations with Singapore, the National Environmental, without speaking for Ben, but I know their National Environmental Agency is assessing this, and for Singapore to be involved or their companies to be involved, that agency would have to also approve the methodology and the project and so on. So, and I think that what I've seen is that many of the countries that are beginning to put in place their standards and regulations and so on integrity for credits are learning from and can be informed by the Integrity Council and so on. And so I think we're likely to see convergence over time, but certainly I think every country that is considering this is going to want to take a look and have its approval. And I think that's another way to make sure that we're meeting a very high bar for integrity.
Great. Any other questions from the floor? Well, I did have one. I'm sorry, I'm just remembered. What is one partnership or action that you hope happens from this COP?
Oh, from this
I
COP?
think everybody can answer about that.
Well, I will. Maybe I'll cheat a little bit, I'm not sure it'll happen this COP. But I would love to see in this Philippines transaction, which I think is such a high integrity project, I'd love to see us be able to put together sovereign buyers alongside compliance buyers facing regulation, alongside voluntary. I think having that sort of blended credit stack, if it were, I think would be a powerful signal. So we're talking with countries and hoping that we can make that case and bring that finance to the project.
Okay. So for us, hopefully, well, as I mentioned, our agreement with Singapore would be a proof of concept, and once proven successful, that would somehow encourage the others to follow. So the Article 6 here would be very important, and would somehow encourage other countries to do the same, no? For us to transition from coal to clean.
All right. So since several topics about the carbon credits, and then as a practitioner also in carbon market for more than 10 years, I felt I cannot also betray myself. So let me also talk about carbon credits. So I really hope that Nat, as you mentioned, so from this COP we could have more clarities and boost for the carbon credits and the carbon trading. And if we link to the topic today, of course, I think we do need innovations. We do need a different type of a structure instrument in which actually carbon credits or carbon revenue could, would be really, really contributing to this type of deal structuring. So with that, and then I also hope that could make great, progress. And then, thanks.
So my suggestion for a partnership is a partnership with us and with the people who are working with us to launch the action plan today. So we've heard that there are models that you can use to early retire coal power plants. There are models for thinking about other things you can do with coal power plants as well. We want emerging economies, utilities to get in touch with us. And we have a group of 29 countries and institutions who are launching the action plan with us today and who want to work with you to help identify where you have projects where we could find ways to transition from coal to clean, which addresses the challenges.
I share Nate's wish, but I want to be a lot more specific. Since we are in the Korean pavilion, it would be great if Korea could also be a sovereign buyer. Together with Singapore. And we are happy to have follow-up conversations and discussions with all the relevant ministries and agencies in Korea in order to advance this. Yeah, thank you.
It's not the first time you're saying that.
Any other questions?
I would have one question. So you touched earlier upon just transition a bit, and maybe it's a question for Julia, but maybe also for the other panelists. But what do you think would a successful just early coal retirement look like for workers and communities?
So, like I said, I think planning early is really key for delivering a just transition for workers and for communities. I think there are some great examples of places which have done that. So in Spain, which is kind of getting to below 1% of coal this year, they had a really great just transition plan where they started early, they brought unions and communities in, they've delivered more jobs in the coal regions than have been lost by the closure of a coal power plant. I think the credit initiative is also a great initiative around just transition. I've been really impressed by the way in which it brings kind of a really structured thinking about what a just transition looks like into the process of planning for financing a retirement. And I think that's something that we could all learn from.
Any other thoughts? No? Okay. We're waiting for our closing remark person, right? We are actually waiting for, he's a bit late, that's the thing. How many minutes left? 10? 5 to 10? Sorry about that. Well, okay then. I do have a... Yeah.
I want to say something not about coal credits because I know that that's been a lot of what we've talked about and that's what we're working on. But I think to go back to where Julia started, I think if we step back and we think about a holistic approach to the transition, thinking about how we also provide finance that helps countries that are looking, that need to provide more energy access, that need to provide more electricity onto the grid, that might, a few years ago or might normally, the most natural thing would be, I'll build a coal plant. How can we help provide the finance, the knowledge, the expertise to meet all of those needs, the affordability, reliability, security, with a cleaner alternative? And we know that in many places, not everywhere, but in many places, the affordability of solar plus storage is that's more affordable than coal. The cost of batteries, the cost of solar panel is going down. And I think if we think about these issues in tandem, how do we think about financing early retirement of existing plants in a way that meets the affordability, reliability, and security? But also, how do we help countries find alternatives that can do a better job at meeting those three needs? I think thinking about that holistically is really important. There's a role for finance, there's a role for concessional finance, there's a role for philanthropy. And I think that's an important thing to keep in mind alongside the early retirement. And I'll give an example. When we think about retiring coal plants, such as the one in the Philippines, we also know that there are plans that were already in the pipeline before the development of the moratorium to put new coal plants online to meet the country's needs. Is there a way to make sure we're meeting those needs and providing the finance to meet those needs so that while we're retiring existing coal plants in that just transition way, we're also helping meet the needs with clean energy? That will take additional thinking, additional finance, but I think that's a very powerful kind of holistic model for the transition as a whole.
I think I just wanted to add to what Nate actually said on financing itself. I think the carbon revenue from carbon credits is important, but I think you also need to think about other alternative or rather more blended finance solutions itself. And one of the things that Singapore has done is to establish this thing called Financing Asia's Energy Transition. We call it FAST-P. It's essentially a $5 billion US dollar fund. It has two parts. One is the concessionary component, which is $1 billion, and you use the concessionary component to crowd in $4 billion of commercial loans itself. And our concessionary component, unlike others, it's not lower interest loans, but it's equity capital itself, where we are prepared to take first loss if need be. And I think that blended finance structure is important because you need some of these grants, you need commercial capital, you need the carbon revenue to come in holistically, and that's where you get a financing structure that gives you the space and the ability to scale up and to fund some of these projects itself. The other point that I wanted to raise, I think building on what Julia said at the start on energy transition, is that here we are talking about retiring coal plants, replacing it with lower carbon alternatives like renewable energy itself. there is a challenge to do that, I think, which has also been mentioned on the panel, which is your grid able to take that intermittent? Because coal is usually base load, it's flat, it's centralized generation. Most renewables are not base load, they are intermittent. That's why you need to balance it out, even it out with energy storage. But I want to take a step back and highlight that actually you need to think about transition, not just on an individual project basis, not just only on a systems level basis on a country, but also on a systems level over the region itself. So one of the things that I mean within ASEAN itself we are pushing is this. It's a concept that's been talked around for a long time. ASEAN energy grid, ASEAN power grid itself, and the Asian Development Bank together with the World Bank recently launched a financing facility to support the ASEAN power grid. It's a $10 billion facility itself. But the key to this is that if we can get ASEAN more interconnected, our grids more interconnected, grids will be more resilient, grids will have higher capacity to be able to accept renewables. And I think this will help facilitate the phase, can be sensitive depending on who you talk to, phase out and phase down of coal power itself. Thanks.
And maybe just to pick up on what Ben said, but one of the areas we've been thinking about really carefully, having had this pushback from a number of countries, is how do you introduce the flexibility to the system that you need to enable you to replace coal with renewables? And I agree with Ben, but ultimately the solution is going to be interconnection, it's going to be long-term storage. We've done a report that we'll publish next week on kind of what are the best forms of flexibility. But I think that one thing we should be thinking about as well in some circumstances is what are the role of coal flexibility. So in countries in Southeast Asia where there isn't kind of options at the moment for grid interconnection and long-term storage, is there a kind of transition role to think about how you would use your coal power plants flexibly to support the faster integration of renewables? And that's a really difficult question. It obviously has a lot more risk even than coal retirement. But I think that if we want to accelerate the transition, it's these sorts of questions that we need to be prepared to think really seriously about, of what in practice is going to allow people to move more quickly to bring renewables onto their grid. And how can we as a community come together and take a sort of sensible view on the risk here as to what should be financed and what are the right guardrails? So, yeah, another question I think maybe for next year for us all to be thinking about.
No. I actually have one since Director Senator Cruz and Director General Cha is here. This kind of finance discussion reminded me of something that happened several years ago, which was a very important topic. Back then, around Glasgow during COVID, the financing from Korea, Japan over there, China over there, of Southeast Asian coal power plants was a big issue. It was an important discussion, and these three governments, in a very short period of time, said no to that. That we're no longer going to finance after receiving some criticism. I was curious how that impacted your work, how that financing decision impacted your work. How does that kind of discussion relate to the transition discussion that's going on now?
Actually, under the ASEAN Energy Cooperation, so we do have what we call the ASEAN Plan of Action for Energy Cooperation, and several issues are being discussed there, and how to address these issues. But basically, as I mentioned by our Singaporean colleague earlier, that we are pursuing the interconnection. So aside from pursuing the interconnection, we need also to look at the supply chain within the ASEAN region, because the ASEAN region has raw materials for the clean technologies. So how are we going to process this? We are not saying that the ASEAN can manufacture a finished product for clean technology, but even parts and components of the clean technologies. No? And even financing, there is a separate cooperation under ASEAN wherein they are talking here of the ASEAN taxonomy. But what my observation, because I'm just involved in the ASEAN Energy Cooperation. So under ASEAN, we need to have a close collaboration, discussions with the other cooperations within the ASEAN region, specifically with the environment, specifically with the finance, so that we do have a more coherent approach in dealing with issues such as climate change and coal transition. Because there was one instance in ASEAN wherein the ASEAN Energy Cooperation released a statement wherein we cannot phase out coal because ASEAN region is highly dependent on coal. On the other hand, the ASEAN Finance released a statement that they cannot support financing coal. So there's a conflict already. So I raised it during our meeting in ASEAN that we need to do a close collaboration, coordination discussion within the different pillars of ASEAN.
Is our guest speaker coming? No? Okay. I think we just have to wrap up. It's very hot here. I'm sorry. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you very much for your time. It was a great pleasure and honor to meet you. And very busy, important people, especially in this topic, the most important people in one space. I think we were very selfish. Thank you very much. Yeah.